Bill Buckner, Forage Sales Director here at Arnold's. Welcome to our virtual forage clinic this year. We're sorry we haven't got you here in person like we typically do every year, but we've got some good information we want to share with you. Andrew will do a walk around in a few minutes, and we've got some other videos that we're going to have saved to the playlist that you can see online on our YouTube page. We're hoping to get to eliminate any issues you might have this year, reduce downtime for you just like we do every year. We'll try to do it a little differently with some online content for you. So welcome to the virtual Claas Clinic.
Hi, my name is Andrew from Arnold. Welcome to the Arnold's Forage Clinic. We're going to start with a walk around of the feeder house and we'll work our way around the machine like we have in the past. I'd like to start with, this is one of the main gearboxes on the feeder house. All the power comes in from a drive shaft on this back upper side of it, as referred to the old machines where there's a pulley that's driving the feeder house. On these machines, this pulley is strictly driving the header, which is driving this quick coupler here. So that's one difference between the older series and these newer series. On this drive shaft that's hooked up, there is grease zerks in there that need to be greased yearly, specifically the one for the telescoping. There's only one grease zerk for the telescoping. There's also grease zerks for the U-joints. There's a U-joint on the backside. There's also a U-joint farther back behind the shield. The only way to get at that is remove the tire and remove the shield. It is only a 500-hour grease zerk that doesn't have to be done but once a year. So if you can get at that once a year, not a big deal. Again, big length to cut gearbox. It takes 80-90 for oil is what the book calls. We have had customers run synthetic 75-90 in it. We see no issues running either. They both work fine. One major point I want to point out is this area gets packed full of material during the corn silage and hay season. And there's seals that drive these feed rolls. These seals can leak out if there's corn packed in there, you won't see it leaking. It's a very expensive gearbox. We like to try and protect it best we can. So please keep this area blown out if you can, daily or as often as you can. I want to point out that this gearbox the seals coming out of this gearbox that drive the lower two feed rolls can leak. Important to keep an eye on that during the season. The tough one is seeing the lower rear feed roll. You do sometimes have to swing the feeder house open and clean that area out to inspect for a leak there. At the same time, the drive shaft that comes across from the pulley enters that gearbox right below the lower feed roll. That can leak also. Just keep that area blown out and clean right in here. Very crucial. Watch for that. On the front of the feeder house, we have these springs. Important to make sure they don't get broken. That will definitely improve your feeding if you can keep these in good shape. We've also seen these springs, the front ones specifically can get magnetized, and that will start throwing issues with your metal detector, which is located in this lower feed roll. The magnet is inside the feed roll. You've got stainless rolls upper and lower. If you keep those springs in good shape, make sure they don't get broken. Typically the eyelets can get broken off, and then the spring will just sit there and not be pulling down and having any pull force on it. And then the feed rolls won't be opening up correctly. When it comes to these springs, there are different part numbers and they're different strengths. So there's a strong, medium, and a weak. Most of the time we end up running the strong setting springs. Depending on your different conditions and crops, you may want to try different ones. Most of the time we end up running with what they come on from factory. We don't have an issue. Claas is doing a lot of setting up the machines the way they really should be set for North America, for our region. And we don't have issues with what they come on there. But if you are in some odd and specific crops and want to try something different, there are options there. Keep that in mind. Inside this feeder house, there's a drive shaft located up in the top. There's grease zerks on that drive shaft that need to be greased multiple times a year, I would say. If you can grease that before hay season, maybe during hay season, and a couple times during corn season, that would be wonderful. Especially the one grease zerk in the middle that greases the telescoping of that drive shaft. As that telescopes, or if you aren't greasing it, it doesn't telescope, it puts pressure on this gearbox, being the upper feed roll gearbox, and it will make that gearbox tip in and out. If that gearbox is tipping, the sealing force in there, makes that to leak, and then the oil out of this gearbox will leak as that gearbox is tipping. So if we can keep the drive shaft telescoping, gearbox won't tip, it just moves straight up and down with the upper feed rolls, then it won't leak on us. If it is leaking or has leaked, we can go in, we can take it off and go in and reseal it. It has been working pretty good. To reseal that, the gearbox calls for 80-90. We have had guys run synthetic 75-90 in it also. Either one works. We have had customers where they have leaked and we have filled them with cornhead grease. That works. The biggest thing I want to point out there is to keep it full. Keep an eye on it. If you have to, every day or every couple days, go in and pump some more cornhead grease into it. We've seen customers take and tap a grease zerk right into the plug, and makes it easy to run cornhead grease through a grease gun instead of a jug. On this machine, this little gray box, this is the rock stop. That is what is detecting the rock from coming in as the upper feed rolls come up and down really fast. That's where that's tripping. Be careful when the feeder house gets swung open for maintenance or cleaning things out. Depending on your tire configuration, that box can hit the tire. So be careful that if you have the feeder house swung open and you need to move the machine, make sure you swing the feeder house back shut. Otherwise, that box can hit the lug and the lug of the tire can rip that off the machine. We talked about this pulley before for the 3-groove belt that drives the header coupler. There's a bearing located just inside this pulley. On older series machines, it's not hooked up to the auto lube. On the newer series machines, it is. So on your machine, get familiar with it, go look and check for that grease zerk that's just inside there. Make sure that's getting greased a couple times a season is enough. In the off season, grab the shaft of the pulley and try to move it up and down. Make sure that the bearing is in good shape. Right here on this machine, like I said, there is a spring that would normally be sitting here for your the pre-compression. Depending on the series, you're going to have a hydraulic cylinder here. Also, depending on the year of the machine and the series, there'll be a hydraulic cylinder instead of a rear spring on both sides. One thing I want to point out on the newer series that have a hydraulic cylinder on this side, the hydraulic hoses run across and underneath, and they have to duck underneath the frame in this area. That spot where that ducks behind the frame, the hydraulic hose likes to rub on the corn stubble. Good idea, during the season or in off season, check that hydraulic hose, make sure that it hasn't rubbed through or getting worn through, and you can replace it before it's gone bad. Right underneath the feed roll is a wear plate, or the corn pan we call it. Keeping this rubber seal is making the seal between the corn head and here. Do not run this in hay. You will have constant rewrap of the crop as it comes around. It's only in there to keep the kernel ears from falling between the two feed rolls. So that comes in and out for hay. There's also side wear plates that go on with that. They can stay in all year. So for hay season, take the corn pan out, leave the side wear plates in there, and then come corn season, just put the corn pan back in. If you don't have these side wear plates, you can get them additional, or if you've lost them, you can still get them through parts. They do look different on the newer series. They're shaped a little different, but the concept is the same. They're just trying to fill the gap between there and the feed roll to keep some of those kernels in from spilling out. I briefly talked about this is the magnet roll. The magnet is inside this roll. They are stainless rolls. The magnet has 5 sections, all split across here. When the magnet trips, it will show on the screen which segment tripped it whether it be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the middle being number 3, 1 being all the way to the left. And so if you're always seeing the one side trip, you can come out and know you need to look where on the roll, where to look for the metal specifically. Both these feed rolls have wear strips that are bolted on. There is a change. The older series machines only have 6 bolts on the bottom ones. The newer series have 8 bolts. There also is a change with the shape of the cup in there. The older ones had a V, the newer ones go to a half moon cup. Putting the newer ones onto the older series doesn't matter as long as you have the right bolt configuration. The biggest thing to keep in mind is the wear. How far worn down are they getting? Because this is the first point of entry for the crop into the machine. We need to keep these 2 rolls sharp and aggressive. If we start letting them get dull, like we see here, in this case they're a little bit worn out, they're not going to be grabbing the crop as aggressively as they should be. So this bottom feed roll will have the wear strip should stick out over the feed roll just a little bit, maybe 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch at the most. Well, I'm not going to see no 1/4 inch, but it's going to stick out a little bit. You should be able to grab your fingernail on that. If you can't grab your fingernail and it's smooth between the roll and the wear strip, time to replace them. I have seen customers, and we've seen it done where we take these wear strips right before they get wore down to where it's smooth all the way across. Take and flip them over, take them all off, put new hardware on, and flip them over, and they get a good sharp edge again, and they'll last a long time. Or another year or so, and then you can replace them next year. Buys you that extra year of wear on them. The top feed rolls, same thing. They're stainless. The wear strips are replaceable. Typically, I tell customers to judge on how rounded are they getting on this front side and how far worn are they into the valley. When they get worn into the valley, down to the feed roll, it's time to replace them. Also keep in mind, if they're still good in the valley, but they're really getting rounded, they're not going to be grabbing that crop nearly as good. From the factory, the machines are coming with a plastic wear strip on each one of the segments. We've seen better feeding with those plastics out. I typically tell customers, run the machine until the wear strips are worn, and then when you need to replace them, just take the plastics out and leave them. We specifically see that be a benefit in wet corn that's been rained on, and dew on the corn. It gives that little bit of aggressive wear that helps us out in feeding. One point I want to point out, when we're doing any work on the feeder house, there's a pin located right up here on the top. Always make sure that pin is in, specifically when we're going to swing the feeder cabinet open. If that pin is out and we go to swing it open, the whole top of the feeder house can swing down. When we're swinging it open, it can land right on your feet, take you out. Not a good deal. Just make sure that pin is in. A lot of the newer series machines, I believe from 497 series and newer, come with factory plumbed inoculant onto the feeder house. It's very common for this hose to get wedged underneath when we're hooking up the header. So it's a good idea when you're going to switch headers or take the header off to clean things out. We get the whole top of the feeder hose blown off clean and make sure that inoculant hose doesn't get pinched underneath the corn header when we go to pick it up. Otherwise, you're not going to be pushing much inoculant through there. Also, it's very common in here for the nozzle tip to get plugged up because of the condition it's in with the crop coming there. So if you're having issues with that, you can get underneath there and clean that out. All right, I want to point out there's rubber bumpers located. That is the bottom stop for both feed rolls. So there's rubber bumpers on this side and tucked underneath on the lower rear side. When they get worn through, there's a little piece of steel on the top of that rubber bumper. If you can see that steel, or if that steel is pulling away from the rubber, it's time to replace those rubber bumpers. I also want to point out the 3-groove belt that runs right here. Keep an eye on that, especially if we're running a large header or if we're running a large earlage header with an adapter. That belt takes a lot of wear running those large earlage adapters. Always keep in mind, keep that belt on hand as a spare belt. And from here, we're going to cut away to an animation of swinging the feeder house open. All right, talking about some of the knife components, sharpening stone, shear bar parts. We always have a lot of questions about the knives. The knives changed. They used to say links and reeks on them. They're stamped right in here. Now they have the arrows stamped in. And that arrow is meant to point outwards towards the tire. So this one would be a right-hand knife sitting in the cab. The left-hand knife would have the arrow pointing the opposite way and would go on the left-hand side. So everything is always referenced from sitting in the seat in the cab, not turned around looking at the cutting cylinder. So when you put the knives in, you can, the newest and latest and greatest, you can do this all the way back to the 494, is you get the washers. One is gonna be bare and one is gonna have a step. So on a right-hand knife, the step will go on the outside towards the tire where the arrow is pointing towards it. The bare washer will go on the inside. You set the knife in there so this ledge is up against the ledge on the cutter drum, and then the knife is bottomed out against that ledge. And then you tighten that bolt up. That will then set the pitch and the angle that it needs to be, and then you simply just tighten these up. The torque spec, 230 foot-pounds. Also double check, if you forget the spec, check the reference, the book. The knife will also come with a piece of paper describing how the arrows go. It's also going to have the torque spec in there. The knives come with 2 knives per box and the bolts that you need. Please don't reuse the bolts. Always put fresh bolts in with it. Also, talking about wear on the knives. That is the wear ledge on the knife. When you get past or up towards the edge of that wear ledge, the knives are worn and need to be replaced. Keep in mind, if you're right up to the edge on the bottom side of the knife, on the top side, you're already through that. It's gone. You're into the regular metal. You're not into the hard metal anymore. So I always like to run guys up to about 1/8 of an inch or even a little more, and at that point, get rid of them. Keeping in mind, as you're wearing that down, you're losing some volume behind there. So if you can replace the knives before they're worn out too far, you're going to end up better off. Brand new knives are sharp. Be careful when you replace them. To wear gloves that you don't cut yourself. It has happened. I've done it. Just be careful. Again, I said this was a right-hand knife. When you're judging the wear on your knives, and the question is if I'm sharpening often enough, do I need to sharpen more? That outside little bit of knife will not wear from the crop. They'll have what I call a widow's peak. It'll be angled down at a little curved angle right here, and that little bit of the tip will not wear off. It'll be getting sharpened, but the crop will wear the rest of the knife away, and you'll have what I call a widow's peak. So if you're getting that, you aren't sharpening off enough and need to sharpen a little bit more, either more often and or more passes at the same time. So watch for that. Also, when you're getting the chips, the rock chips in there, every time you chip that, you're chipping away on the hardness too. So you need to stay ahead of the sharpening. We typically recommend 5 to 8 or up to 10 passes every 4 to 5 hours, give or take. Also, that's a vague adjustment setting, very dependent on your conditions and your crop conditions, what you're running through the machine, how many small stones are going through in hay, what type of variety you're chopping in corn can all wear on that differently. Talking about sharpening, here's how the stone will come, the brand new stone. It comes with the sleeve protector. That's meant to protect the threads on the stone holder, and it comes with new rings. I always recommend you replace the rings every time. Also, if you are just going in and adjusting the stone, I've had cases where sometimes the rings, there was a small series they were experimenting with a different material. They get super rock hard. Typically those are really dark in color. They're a dark red color or almost a maroon color. I would, if you open it up and take the stone out to adjust it, if you have the maroon ones, I would get rid of them and order a set of the newer style. That's all we have in stock now. They're a softer rubber. They do a better job. Where the hard maroons wouldn't release the stone when we try to push it back down. When you're adjusting the stone, I don't have the steels here, but I have the rubbers. When you put them in, it'll be two rubbers, a steel, 1 rubber, and 2 more steels in that order. from top to bottom. The steels also have one little chamfer edge cut on them. That's meant to go down towards the rubber, so that allows that rubber to squish. When we put the top nut on, it's pushing on the top steels, and that squishes the rubbers out and holds that stone in place. You'll see in the video, you can set it 3 times. Typically, when we reset the stone and you reset it that last time, or go to adjust it, and you can see this rubber, at that point is when I would replace the stone, just because you're losing the pinching factor of that rubber. You aren't going to be clamping that stone in place anymore. As we go to the newer series, they've changed the shear bars. There's multiple options for shear bars. You can get Mad Jig, ones that are meant for grass, for corn. There is multiple options. Talk with the service techs at your store. They have a good idea of what kind of conditions you're running, give you a recommendation of what shear bar to run. The shear bars have one edge and a second edge. They don't have edges 3 and 4. That is strictly on the bottom. So you have one edge, and when you need to flip it, you take it off and you rotate it and wear it on the other side. That is the 2 wear edges you get on the shear bar. The shear bar bolts, they did change. They used to come with Loctite painted on them. They no longer do. They're coming as a bare bolt, and they changed the grade. They used to be an 8.8 grade bolt. Now they're a 10.9. So the new torque spec is going to come with a 10.9 without Loctite. They want at 207 foot-pounds. There are still shear bars coming out of parts that before they've changed that spec, there's a sheet of paper inside the box with the shear bar that'll say 221. I recommend going by what the paper says. So wait until that paper gets changed and then adjust that over. On 498 series, there is a kit we can sell that this is the spacer / ledger bar that sits underneath the shear bar. It sits like that in the machine. Your knives are then coming down here doing the chopping. There is a different kit we can add. We recommend putting it in on 498s, and that allows us to drop the shear bar down a little bit further. It's going to improve our throughput and improve our chop quality a little bit. So talk to your techs, talk to your parts guy. I recommend doing that. Part of that kit is it's going to be a different spacer bar, and it's also going to be a different smooth roll scraper. It's going to raise that smooth roll scraper up and then drop this down, creating that advantage for throughput. Right now we're going to cut away to an animation.
Maintenance procedures need to be straightforward. Knife sharpening is started from the cab. The very robust grindstone guide makes for perfect sharpening. The grindstone can be adjusted or replaced easily. Basic adjustment of the stone is performed by means of this screw element, so that the height of the adjusted or replaced stone immediately corresponds to that of the knives. The long grindstone can be adjusted up to 3 times before it has to be replaced by a new one. The shear bar is clamped in place hydraulically. During the adjustment process, the clamping force is released hydraulically. The advantage? The bar is adjusted quickly, in just 50 seconds, and is secured precisely. Adjustment of the shear bar causes automatic simultaneous adjustment of the drum concave. In this way, the gap between the concave and the knife is maintained until the knife is fully worn. The advantage? Regardless of the degree of knife wear, crop delivery is always consistent, which makes for an optimal crop flow.
Over on the right-hand side of the machine, we'll open the door. Again, depending on the series, 497 series and newer, this door will swing out to the right. It'll pivot off of the back post over here. There is a recommendation that the book reads, do not open this door when outside. They're saying that because of a little bit of wind, or if the wind picks up, it can damage the door. It can swing freely on its own. Just be cautious of what the weather conditions are when you're opening the door. It does make it easier to slide the processor into the processor compartment. Gives you a little extra room when you're doing your maintenance in the wintertime or any general work on the machine. Good idea to do that. The bolt that latches the front is located in a different spot on the different models. So get familiar with your model if you want to be swinging that door open. On this side of the engine, the one crucial area I want to talk about is the fan belt. The fan belt often is run really loose or gets wore into where it is running loose on machines. When I'm out and about in the country working on customers, I can often feel a vibration on the machines that maybe the customer isn't used to because they've been sitting in it all day. They don't feel the vibration coming on. When somebody new gets in the machine, they can feel that vibration. But excessive movement in that belt, in this case, this one is set proper. You don't have that excessive movement. When the engine starts up, there's so much torque on that belt, it can bounce and jump. And if you watch it, the tension pulley will bounce and jump when it's starting. So that can kick the fan belt off. Also, the belt is a small part to keep on hand. Keep it in the toolbox or up in the cab, just in case you were to have an issue with one. In off season, you want to check that belt for any cracks, and don't just look at it like it sits. Either start and stop the engine or take the belt off and rotate it around. Make sure you're not missing a crack that's behind one of the pulleys. You also want to feel the inside grooves of the pulleys. If they're having some excessive wear, if they're really super sharp, I'd consider maybe replacing the pulleys just to keep you from burning off belts. Talking about the tension of the belt, the proper tension is with the pipe. That pipe is just supposed to be able to rotate. You're not supposed to be able to move the pipe up and down. Like I said, when you pull on that, you should be able to watch the gap of the pipe. That pipe is hidden sometimes, depending on the engine configuration, hidden behind the bracket. The fan drive gearbox calls for 80/90 oil, depending on the series. There is 1 year machine on a 497 that does have the variable fan drive. That calls for a synthetic oil. I also want to point out the drain plug on that is located in just about the wrong area. The book calls for a mount that needs to go in there. Go by that. So put that amount of oil in the gearbox. Don't go by the check plug that's on that gearbox. As we got newer, everything is coming with the constant fan drive, and you can just fill it to the check plug of 80/90 oil. So again, on those variable fan drives, that takes a separate belt in there. Keep in mind the maintenance you have to do with that. If you have that variable fan drive, talk to the Arnold's techs individually, and we can help you through that. You've also got a serpentine belt. Good idea in the off season, pop that serpentine belt off, check the idlers and tensioner, make sure all the pulleys are running really good and smooth. One area I want to point out, we have all these coolant hoses with just hose clamps that in the wintertime, if the machine sits in cold storage, some of the hose clamps and the hose itself will tend to drip and leak. When you start it up in the spring, common to have some coolant that has dripped out of those fittings. And as the temperature warms back up, they stop leaking. So sometimes just give the hose clamps a little extra crank, make sure they're tight, top the coolant off, and you're good to go. Also keep in mind, depending on the engine, there is different coolant that goes in your machine. There is a sticker up on top where the coolant fill is that tells you which coolant, and the coolant has changed names a couple times over the years. So again, if you have questions, refer to the book. It's going to tell you one name of the coolant, and then we at Arnold's know what that has changed to, or it's going to give you the new name. So just make sure you're putting the right coolant in. All the machines have a water separator filter located in this area. Depending on, MAN engine has 2. The Mercedes are going to have 1 water separator filter, but they're always located in this area, mounted to the cooling package. Verify you're getting the right filters. Make sure you got the right filters. I got numbers on them. Simple tasks to do, but make sure you're getting the right filters for the right engine that you're working with. On talking about the cooling package, we have this radiator screen. We have the wind wing that goes round and around. We also have a brush that's located on the outside. And as the series gets newer, we have brushes on the inside. Good idea to keep those brushes in good shape, keep them free of debris. They do get worn. Typically I see these brushes wear on the first maybe 8 inches of travel from the outside in. Usually I don't see the brushes up on the inside wear very fast. Takes a couple of years before these get wore, but after a few years running the machine, these brushes should probably get replaced. Fairly simple to do. All you have to do is swing the cooling package open, and we can access the brushes that are located inside the wind wing. We also, in that cooling package, we have our radiators. They're always stacked on the bottom, the oil coolers, and the air-to-air cooler on the top. Good idea to make sure that stays good and clean. Make sure that this seal on this door stays in good shape, that is sealing on you. I've seen cases where we can blow a hydraulic hose, or we can be sucking dust up inside there. We need to be making sure that cooling area stays good and clean. Also, as the series get newer, the air intake started coming through that screen now. Instead, it used to suck the air through its own screen up above. Now, all our engine air intake is coming from inside that screen. So you need to make sure these brushes are in good shape, cleaning the leaf debris, dust material off, so that we can get good quality air up to the engine. Right below our cooling package, we have our depth tank. It's located in the same spot on every machine. It is the same volume for every model, regardless of horsepower. It's about 35 to 37 gallons. There is multiple different ideas on what to do for maintenance on that in the off season. We've typically seen the best luck with, if you can, end the year with that tank about half full or a little under, allowing that depth to freeze and expand. And then in the spring, top it off full with fresh, clean depth. We seem to have least amount of issues with the depth system on that. Also, keep in mind, there is a filter for the depth system. It is located behind this tire on the frame. So you have to go underneath, and just inside this tire on the frame is where the filter is for the depth system. This is the main entrance into the processor compartment. The processor, when we put them in, you can either go through the top grate or in through this side, sit on the tracks, and then it can roll in. That sounds really easy. It is a tight fit. Regardless of which processor you have, we can sell the machines with both a Claas processor and a shear processor. They both have their advantages, but the main difference between them is the Claas is going to run a grease bearing, the shear is going to run an oil bath bearing. On the Claas one, it will hook up to the factory auto lube system. There is a fitting up in there that's located right above where the processor sits. The auto lube system, keep in mind, it's going to be continuously pumping that grease out all season during corn. So good idea to, in the morning when you do your walk around, climb up there, clean some of the excess grease that's fallen off of those bearings, clean that out of there so we don't have a grease fire or any issues with that excess grease. The shear systems are oil bath bearing. They are running a lubricant or a shear mist, depending on the year, same concept, but they're running that pressurized air. Like I talked about earlier, we need to keep that air clean and dry coming into that lubricant so that lubricant functions properly, and then lubing our processor bearings well. That lubricant or shear mist also needs to be drained on a regular basis. I recommend at least every couple days, take the drain plug out of the bottom of that mister box and make sure that any excess water that's settled out overnight gets drained out of there, and then we have just clean oil in there. If we have to, I've seen cases where we've had the bearing temps run hot, and because we had excess moisture in that mister box, we ended up draining it all out, putting fresh clean oil in, didn't do anything else special, and then our bearing temps instantly started coming down because they weren't getting the proper lube. So it's very crucial to keep that in mind. Where the processor mounts, below it is a transition chute. There's wear liners in there that should get checked in the off season. Above it is the accelerator or blower, depending on your terminology. There's replaceable paddles and a back liner. Those replaceable paddles come in several different versions. There's a groove serrated that's going to come factory. and then there's a flat mad jig paddle, we call it. And then there's a flat paddle, and then there's a flat mad jig paddle. The mad jig one has the hardness wear liner, wear strip on it. The flat one is just a plain flat paddle. The flat paddles do give us a little bit advantage in a little bit better blowing of the crop out the discharge chute. It works really nice when we're trying to open fields and hit the back of the truck. The one thing I want to point out is the serrated paddles are easy to tell when they're worn due to the teeth are just worn down flat and thin. The flat paddles are difficult. The wear strip that's on them won't wear off. It'll stay there, but the metal paddle that's behind that wear strip will wear, and it'll create a little cup divot, and you can start getting really thin. It'll fold those paddles over. So just because you have flat paddles, don't think they'll last forever. They will last a long time, but they do need to be maintained properly also. We also want to make sure that that accelerator gap is set proper. We've had our best luck setting that gap between 2 and 3 millimeters for hay, and we used to tell customers about 5 to 7 millimeters for corn. If you're going to run the flat paddles, we've had really good luck leaving that gap at 3 millimeters for corn. If you're running a high horsepower machine with a big 10 or 12 row head, I would recommend running that accelerator gap at 3 millimeters all the time and keep it set there. So if you're running a lot of acres, check it after hay, right before corn, and check it in the off season. That is adjusted by adjuster bolts that are on each side of the accelerator, right in the openings. We can keep that accelerator, you can adjust that each side individually and bring that back. So I come through the access panel that's above it, and I stick an Allen wrench down on the back side of the paddle to the back panel and just checking the clearance. Now when you adjust it, when you're done, roll the accelerator over to make sure there's not one paddle that hits, because sometimes the paddles aren't perfectly square with the world in there, and one will rub. We don't want those rubbing on that back panel. Located right above that is the tower. There's tower liners in there, 2 liners front and back. They need to be checked for wear, especially up on the sides and in the corners. They can wear off. Working higher above that, we have the discharge gear, the worm gear. There's some wear that can come into there. That should get checked out in the off season. Typically I see when the spout has too much give, when you stop hitting the button, the spout jumps forward or back. There's a little excess play there, and that can be adjusted out of there. On that right hand upper side, there's a sensor with a little plastic wheel. That's going to be for the OptiFill option. That allows us further rotation up over the top corner of the cab. That sensor can sometimes fail because of its proximity condition. It's running in the dirt and the gunk all day long. It gets beat on that way. That can either come out of time, or the sensor will fail. That can cause you issues with getting that spout full rotation, getting it to set back on the rest properly. So keep that area clean so it's easy to maintenance. These are the adjuster bolts I was talking about for the accelerator adjustment. We can turn these in to pulling the accelerator back. Doing that, there's a nut on each side that you have to loosen up to allow that to come back. Same thing, you turn the inside bolts out to push the accelerator forward. Located down below, this is the processor drive area. There's different configurations you can have in there. For the shear processor, some of them had an air cylinder mounted to a linkage for the tension cylinder, but the general belt configuration is always routed the same way. And then here's the idler on the bottom. There's a manual grease zerk we need to hit right here that's hidden underneath the shield, that we need to grease that every day or twice a day. If you're going to be running 24 hours or a 12-hour shift, I'd try to grease it at least twice in a 12-hour shift if possible. Also depends on each operation. This is the grease fitting that'll hook up to the Claas processor. When you're running in the hay, like we have it set up here with the hay chute in, we're going to hook that line back up into the return, and we need to make sure that stays tight. If it's a little loose, it will throw a grease fault, and we'll have issues with that. So we need to make sure that fitting stays tight all the time. This is the access panel I talked about that I looked through and reached through to adjust that accelerator gap. In an earlier part of the video, I talked about taking off panels to access the accelerator drive pulley to clean out the pulleys. The panels are located here. You can take those out and you can stick your blowgun through to clean that pulley out. Again, here's the track where the processor will sit, slide in, and then the hay chute will slide in. One thing I want to point out, very crucial, on the front of the hay chute and the front of the processor has a little spot also. This is the tab that needs to fit underneath the eye bolt. There's an eye bolt on each side that these components need to fit underneath, and that's holding the front of them down. Slide the hay chute in, it fits underneath there nice and snug, and then it can't move. The processor will fit the same way. Those eye bolts need to be fit to your processor to fit proper and tight. And here's the hold down cranks. They need to be turned and tightened down so that they hold in that processor in tight. Same thing, holding the hay chute in nice and tight. Up above that, this is where the sensor is that I was talking about for the spout rotation. That sensor is the one that sits in the dirt and the gunk all day, in the grease, and we need to make sure that area stays clean. And here's the plastic gear that we need to make sure is set proper. If we close the door, we can talk about the spout. The discharge spout on this one will have 3 extensions. For the wide 12-row head, typically we'll run 2 extensions for a 10-row head. I want to point out where each extension is bolted together is where we want to watch for movement or wear. I also want to point out where the access panels are underneath is where the spout can sometimes crack up from the bottom. So during season or in off season, take some time, clean the spout up, look at the spout really close, take a wrench up there and check the hardware during the season and in your morning walk around, make sure the hardware stays tight. If you've noticed the hardware for those spout extensions were to start coming loose, that's the time when we recommend you take all the hardware out and replace it with good fresh hardware, because those washers have a little cup to them, and that cup can eventually start working flat, and then the bolt doesn't stay tight anymore. So at that time we should put fresh new hardware in there and keep that nice and tight. There is wear liners. The top bolted liner is the main liner in the spout. There's also side liners in the spout. We typically see wear up in between the first and second inspection hole there. We also see wear between the top 2 liners right at that seam between the end of the first liner and the beginning of the second liner. That's a high wear point there. So in off season, look at that. If you have any issues plugging with the machine, look at that area. Talking about the spout flipper, there is an adjustment on the cylinder that you can move that cylinder in and out for getting a little bit closer for the hay head and a little bit further out for the corn head. You have adjustments you can do there depending on your individual settings. All right, on this side of the machine, I like to point out the wheel bolts. They did make changes over the years. As the series started, they were all studded and had wheel nuts on, and now they've gone to wheel bolts. Either way, very crucial to make sure these stay tight. If the machine's been in for service, or if you, the customer, have had the tire off for anything, the first 8 to 10 hours of operation, we highly recommend you double check these bolts, make sure they're torqued properly. Keep in mind, if the machine's been in with us for service and we've had the tire off, or if you don't know if we've had the tire off, please ask, and we're happy to tell you, or just double check it for safety. Make sure the tires stay on. I also want to point out in this area there's 2 up and down for the feeder house, and stop for the reverse. And if you push and hold the reverse, it will reverse the feeder house with the cutting cylinder running. Those switches are prone to getting dirt and dust on the back side, especially moisture. So we end up taking the cover off on the bottom and blowing that area out. It's a good idea to do that in the off season. Make sure that area gets cleaned out when you wash your machine up, especially after you washed your machine, because all the crop that was dry in there, and then you washed it, now it's all wet, soupy crop, and can wreak havoc with the wiring on those switches. So keep in mind that. Now we're gonna move over and open up the door. When doing that, the machine should come, newer machines will come with the 13 mil, 8 mil wrench. That will be used to open up all the door and take all the shields off. If you don't have one, talk to your local Claas salesman, he'll get you one. And then we can open the door. Inside the door, we have our factory water inoculant tank. And we have the pump for that system. We also have the primer switch. Depending on the series, the switch looks a little bit different. Some have a toggle switch, some have a push button, but it's always located in the same spot. Right above all that, we also have the hydraulic valving. Depending on the series, the valving looks a little bit different. Working from rear to the front, the first is going to be the main valve, then the low pressure valve, and then our header raised lower valve. On 494 series and older, the early 494s, the valve is located down on top of the transmission. 497 series, 498s, 500, 502s, 499s, all the newer series, that valve is located right up there. On top and bottom of that valve is a hydraulic accumulator. That is in charge of the cushioning for the auto contour for the header. The top one is used for the hay head. The bottom one is used for the corn head. A common issue we've seen is the header does a lot of bouncing at random with the contour engaged. So you're going down the field with the contour engaged and it's following the ground, all of a sudden the head starts shaking and bouncing. The bottom accumulator that's used for the corn head is failed, more than likely, and we need to replace that. You can't just pull it off and put a new one on without relieving the pressure first. So you need to lower the header all the way to the ground and hold the down button until all the pressure has left the valve. Then you can pull the accumulator off and swap a new one on there and you're good to go. Also located in this area is the feeder drive pump on the back side of the pulley. Here's the feeder drive motor. Then that drives the gearbox, that runs the shaft all the way up to the front to turn the feed rolls. That's where we get our variable displacement hydraulic drive feed rolls. That gearbox oil needs to be changed every year. It calls for 80-90. Again, synthetic 75-90 works fine, but it gets hidden right behind the shield that's located here to close it off, so guys forget about that gearbox. Very important to keep that in mind. Hidden behind the shield here is the hydraulic tensioner for the belt. When we're doing work on things and asking guys to, if you're looking at bearings or we're looking at vibration issues or things like that, I want to point out sticking a flat pry bar in here can damage that pulley. So if we stick a pry bar in there and pull on that pulley to release the tension, you can damage that pulley. Often I like to tell customers, climb back by the engine and push down on the big open area here. And then you don't end up damaging that pulley. Otherwise, if you use a hook pry bar, you can get that to work. Talking about pulleys, very important to keep them blown out and clean. We've seen a lot of vibration issues caused strictly from dirt building up inside the edges of the pulley. We've gone out on service calls for a vibration issue, planning to do a bearing, and in the end just looked at, oh, we have a lot of buildup on these pulleys, let's clean them out and run it. And that's taking our vibration away. That'll make a big difference. It'll help save on the life of your bearings. A lot easier on the machine. The machine runs smoother and quieter. Keep that in mind. I know some of the pulleys, especially the accelerator drive pulley that's hidden up behind the tire, sometimes you can access that from the shielding, taking the shielding off on the inside of the doghouse on the other side. And the cutting cylinder one is tough to get at, but those are the two crucial ones we want to keep blowing out. Working further back on the machine, the four-wheel drive planetaries is a small amount of oil. It takes about a quart. Recommend that get changed every year. Also back on the lug nuts, make sure the wheel nuts stay tight. We want to make sure those stay torqued. Above that, we have, this is the main drive clutch that turns the belt. Just inside there is the actual clutch disc inside the air vents there. I like to take my finger and wiggle the clutch in off season, and that'll tell you if there's wear on the splines of that clutch. That is the clutch that will go out if the machine is plugged and customers are trying to pull the slug through the machine by engaging the main drive. So it's one single clutch, so take it easy on that. Located right above that is our DEF system. There's been very little maintenance we've had to do to this aside from changing the filter. On the engine, there's one gearbox here. There's a check plug and a drain plug. Very crucial, this gearbox needs to get changed oil every single year, and that is specific. It takes a synthetic 7590 oil in it. In that area, look for leaks around, either leaking out of the air vent holes of the clutch or up inside by the pulley where the belt is. Also watch for leaks coming out of the flywheel area, the engine. The seal can be leaking all the oil out of that gearbox into the flywheel and then dripping out. We need to make sure that oil, if you're gonna run a lot of hours, 400 or 500 hours a year, I would definitely either change or check that oil level before corn silage starts. Here we have one of the air lines for the air compressor system. Depending on the configuration of your machine, those air compressor components are moved around depending on the year of the machine. Just get familiar with your machine and figure out where some of those components are. I did skip, there is, depending on what you have for a processor machine, we will sometimes mount a filter housing right here on this shield for the shear processor systems. That air filter should get changed every year. The intent is to pull some of the dirt and moisture out of the air before it gets up into the shear lubricating system. So again, get familiar with your machine, know what you have. If you have, ask us questions, we can help you. We can help tell you where it's at. Depending on the model of the machine, it gets mounted in different places for convenience. So again, get familiar with your individual machine. On the back of the machine, we have the service tool compartment and the battery compartment. One thing I want to point out is these doors, as they've gone newer, the latches sometimes can work loose. So keep that in mind as season's going on, through your daily walk around the machine. Make sure the door is sealed nice and tight. If it's not, you can take and bend the tab a little bit to make sure it is sealed tight, specifically in the battery compartment. You can open the rear door. Depending on the series and the model configuration, all of the newer series, the hydraulic tank has been on this side. You get to the older 494 series and they move the tank around a little bit up and down, but the setup is always the same. There's a gauge mark that's meant to be checked with the header in the lower position. That's where the hydraulic oil should be. Also on the newer series, a 502, they changed where the drain is on the hydraulic tank. They don't have this nice hose that comes down on the bottom. They just have the petcock straight on the bottom, so you'll have to put a drain hose under it to make that work. On 497 series and newer, they mounted the air tank up above here. It used to be located down below. We then gained an additional fuel tank for more volume. That took place of where the air tank was. We had to move the air tank up here. One concern we have is the air tank gets extremely hot because it's located very close proximity to the exhaust manifold. So that air is sitting hot in this tank. Now for the machines that we use a shear processor on, as that air travels to the front of the machine, it cools down, condenses, and we get moisture. So I talked earlier about the filter that needs to be in there for the shear system. You need to maintenance that. Good idea to drain this tank yearly or twice a year to make sure the water is getting out of that. It does have an automatic spitter, they call it, that drains the water out, but sometimes that gets gunked up and doesn't always work. So in the off season, good idea to bleed the air out of the system and then pull that to make sure the moisture is drained out of there. This air tank also swings out for ease of maintenance to get at your engine oil dipstick, depending on the engine configuration. We also have our main ground drive hydraulic pump, the working pump, and the steering pump. We also have hydraulic filters, depending on the series, or if you've upgraded to the secondary filter. You can upgrade a 497 and newer. 498s come factory with a second hydraulic filter. 497 series only had and 494s only had the one, but everything newer all has the two from factory. So keep that in mind when you're servicing your machine in the off season to change both filters. 498 machines and newer, there's a sticker located on the tank that calls for the Agrihide Extreme, they call Agrihide 46 Extreme hydraulic oil. It is meant to withstand a higher temperature that we're running with the hydraulic feed rolls. And some of the other features we're running with the hydraulic pre-compression, we need to be able to cool that oil and keep it cool. So good idea to make sure you're putting the Agrihide Extreme oil in a 498 series and newer. It is compatible with the other oils. It will blend. It's a non-issue that way. We just need to make sure we're getting that cooling factors in that. Up above that, we have our engine. Again, there's multiple different engine configurations depending on the model of the machine and the year of the machine. Also depending on the emissions factor of your machine, which year you have it. So every engine is going to be different depending on the model. So you need to get familiar with which engine you have and the maintenance required. One area I want to point out is the valves. It is different between the engines. We talked a lot about setting the valves. Claas recommends on a man engine, we set the valves at 500 hours and every 500 hours after that. So on the machines running a lot of acres through, it ends up being setting the valves every year. Some guys, depending on what they're running, can get by doing it every other year. But 500 hours is the benchmark. We need to set the engine valves on those machines. On the Mercedes engines, it's not till 1,000 hours and then every 1,500 after that, I believe. But double check with the book of your exact model and engine that you have. If you have questions, please call us at Arnold's. The service techs can help you through that and figure out what and where and when it needs to be set. We don't recommend the customers get in there and set that themselves. It's a little bit more of a technical process and to get done. So we recommend you work with us to get that accomplished. So in the cab, we have the original style Cebis. There's going to be a separate video that we're posting for the newer touchscreen Cebis, or Cebis Touch as they call it. This is going to be a quick video on some of the basic settings in this screen. Everything that is located in this screen is also located in that Cebis Touch under the same menu. So all of our header settings are in the same header menu, just like in the Touch. So this is going to be the main road screen, the road travel screen. When we flip the road travel switch, it should flip back and forth with the engine running. Otherwise, if we hit our escape button on the touchpad, we can manually flip it back and forth from the road screen to the main chopping screen. On this main chopping screen, I want to point out in this area is our header height auto contour settings. I want to point out the header with the arrow and dot is meaning pressure. That symbol correlates over to the joystick. That symbol is the same on the joystick. Same with the header height, the two arrows with the lines. That symbol is the same as the joystick. So when running a corn head with non-contour electric sensors on it, we're going to run all our set points off of the height side. If we have a corn head with the sensors on it, we're going to run on the pressure side. So this line represents the ground. That black line on the pressure side represents where the ground is at. So if we have a corn head with the feeler sensors on it, we're going to have our set points above that black line. Now if we have a pickup style head that if it's built before the last couple of years, so 2018 and older, it will have no sensors on it. Then we run our set points below this black line. The newer style pickup heads have sensors on it. Then we need to run up above this black line because the electronic sensors are sensing above the ground. So these carrots are adjustable. We can manually move it with the joystick where we need to, and we push and hold the corresponding section that we're trying to move, hold it for 2 or 3 seconds, and we'll move the last moved carrot. That'll be the one highlighted gray. When you're in use with that carrot, it's going to be black. This area will also be highlighted black, respectively, which one you're using. The other way to move these carrots is to turn our hotkeys. We turn the right hand hotkey, one click to the left, and with the cutting cylinder running, it will populate in here where the carrot's at, and we can turn the knob and set where they need to be. You can do that on the go in the field. That's a quick, easy adjustment. I want to point out that just those header settings I also want to point out, here's our 4-wheel drive set point. So right now, our joystick is in reverse mode. Now it's in neutral. Now it's in forward with that arrow. The rear wheel is going to highlight, going to be white for 2-wheel drive. It's going to be gray for standby mode, and switch over to all black for 4-wheel drive engaged. Your engine hours are often found on the road screen right there, if guys want to run off engine hours. Otherwise, you can go into the menus up top, the computer looking menu, to get your machine hours. Another common question I get is the maintenance. You'll get a reminder down the bottom corner for the maintenance counters, 10 hours, a 50-hour maintenance. That's found under the wrench menu here. One question I get in this corner, anything with a lightning bolt on these screens means out of range. So right now there is built in like a satellite sensor, so it kind of knows where this machine is at for either telematics purposes or for a GPS service that they use in Europe that we don't utilize. But when you drive inside a building, this symbol will come on. If you have the yield and moisture, you'll get that lightning bolt with a little feather and a percentage sign. That means your moisture is out of range, or you are not putting enough tons per hour through the machine to be registering the yield. I also want to point out this little arrow is the acre counter. When this is highlighted black, you are counting acres. That means the head is down below the working set point. You're driving forward, you're running crop through the machine, you are counting. When you have the yield on the machine, there'll be another one with a little percentage symbol that will highlight black when you are running crop through the machine and measuring yield. All of these 3 settings can be changed to one of the a different set parameter. If you want to watch engine temp, if you want to watch, here's your gear transmission feeder drive temp, the feeder drive temp there. You can change these around to what you want to watch. You can have a moisture reading for the yield as an instantaneous moisture. You can change these settings to where you want them to be. Everything on this Cebis is also adjustable. You can move the Cebis side to side. You can turn it. If you have other questions, every setting in here is in the book on how to operate and what to do. You can go into the chopper menu and do the change settings in there. You can go into the sharpener menu and sharpen the knives, set the shear bar, park the shear bar, which is back the shear bar out away from the knives. All that is explained in the book. If you have questions, please refer to the book and or call one of us at Arnold's and we can talk you through it.
Hey, thanks for joining us today with our virtual clinic. We appreciate your viewing it. If you've got some questions, please feel free to call any of our service numbers. They're at the bottom of the page. Also, be sure to let your Claas salesperson know that you watched the video, and email him or call him or text him and let him know. Tell him which videos you watched by giving him the code that's been at the bottom of the screen a few times throughout this video. They'll enter you into a drawing where we've got a $500 gift certificate and some tool sets and so forth that Claas has given us for some door prizes, and we've got a $300 gift certificate from Arnold's for a service inspection, and got some gift certificates from Shear and some other door prizes, some pretty cool stuff. So let them know that you watched the video, and each one that you watch will get you entered one time for those door prizes. So thanks again, and good luck with this upcoming harvest season.